Welcome back to Secret Story Hub. My name is Margot Sinclair, and I was 32 years old the night before my wedding when I found out my grandmother had rewritten the toast I spent 3 months writing for my mother, and she never told a single person she'd done it. I found the pages on my nightstand at 10:30 that night. My handwriting was gone, every word replaced with hers, in careful blue ink, tucked inside the same cream folder I'd used for the original draft. At first, I thought I was tired, that I was misreading my own toast. Then I read the first line out loud in my empty hotel room, and it wasn't mine anymore. My toast had been about my mother, about the nights she worked 2 jobs after my father left, about the way she still drove 40 minutes every Sunday just to sit in my kitchen and help me plan a wedding she'd once told me she never thought she'd see. It was the truest thing I'd ever written. The new version barely mentioned her. It opened with my grandmother's own wedding 40 years ago at a church that didn't exist anymore. It talked about sacrifice, about family loyalty, about how some people forget where they came from once they get everything they wanted. I read that line 3 times before I understood who it was about. Me. I called my mother first. She didn't answer. It was almost 11. Then I called my fiancé, Owen, who was 2 rooms down the hall with his groomsmen, probably half asleep already. He picked up on the second ring. "She what?" he said, and I could hear him sitting up in bed. "She rewrote it, Owen. The whole thing. It doesn't even sound like me." Did she say why? I hadn't asked her yet. I hadn't even spoken to her since dinner, when she'd sat at the end of the table quieter than usual, watching my mother laugh with my aunt about something small and ordinary, her jaw tight the entire time. "I'm going to talk to her," I said. "Tonight?" "Tomorrow, before the ceremony. I need to know why she thought this was hers to change." I didn't sleep much after that call. I kept the folder open on the desk, comparing the 2 versions line by line, trying to figure out at what point my grandmother had decided my wedding was the place to settle something that had nothing to do with me. Because underneath the sacrifice speech and the church that didn't exist anymore, there was something else in those pages. Something that sounded less like a toast and more like a message. Aimed at my mother, meant to be read out loud in front of 200 people, at the one moment my mother couldn't walk away. I didn't know yet what my grandmother was really trying to say with that toast, or why she'd waited until the night before my wedding to say it. But by the time the reception ended the next day, everyone in that room would know exactly what she meant and exactly why her seat wouldn't be at that head table when she said it. I found my grandmother at 7 the next morning, sitting alone on the porch of the guest house at Cedarbrook Manor, a cup of coffee going cold in her hands. She was already dressed, hair pinned the way she always wore it for church, and she didn't look surprised to see me standing there with the folder in my hand. "You found it," she said. Not a question. "Grandma Dorothy? What is this?" I held the pages out. "This isn't the toast I wrote. This isn't even about my mom anymore." She set her coffee down slowly. "Sit with me, Margot. I don't have time to sit. I get married in 6 hours. Then you have time to listen for 5 minutes. Her voice wasn't sharp, which somehow made it worse. I sat. "Your mother asked me not to come to your bridal shower in April," she said. "Did you know that?" I hadn't. My mother had told me Grandma Dorothy was busy that weekend, visiting my aunt in Richmond. I said as much. I wasn't in Richmond. I was here in Annapolis, 20 minutes from where that shower was held. Your mother called me the week before and asked me to stay away. She said I'd make it about myself. She said the last 3 family events, I'd turned into something else. Her hands were steady, but her eyes weren't. Maybe she wasn't wrong. That still doesn't explain why you rewrote my toast. Because I wanted, just once, for someone to say my name in that room without your mother deciding what version of me they were allowed to hear. She looked at me then, really looked. "I have loved you since the day you were born, Margot. And I have spent the last 10 years watching your mother rewrite me into someone smaller every time we're in public together. I thought if I could just say it myself, in my own words, in front of everyone who matters to you, maybe it would stop feeling like I don't exist in this family anymore." I didn't know what to say. I had spent the whole night angry, certain this was about my mother, about old grudges I didn't understand and hadn't asked to inherit. I hadn't considered that my grandmother might have been drowning quietly for years, and that my wedding, of all things, had felt like her last open door. "You still can't read that version," I said finally. "Not because you're wrong, because it isn't fair to Mom, and she doesn't even know it's happening yet." Her jaw tightened, the same way it had at dinner. "So I stay quiet again?" "No," I said, surprising myself. "You don't stay quiet, but you don't ambush her either. There's a difference, Grandma, and I think you know it." She didn't answer right away. Behind her, through the guest house window, I could see the reception tent already going up across the lawn, white and gold, exactly the way I'd planned it for months. In 6 hours, 200 people would be sitting under it, waiting to hear from the people I loved most. I just didn't know yet whether my grandmother would be one of the names on that list, or whether, by the time dinner started, her chair at the head table would already be empty. I didn't tell my mother about the folder. Not that morning, not while she was zipping up my dress, not while she was pinning my veil with hands that kept shaking a little more than usual. I kept thinking about what my grandmother had said about being rewritten into something smaller, and I realized I didn't actually know which version of this story was true. I only had one side of it. So during the reception, after the vows, after the first dance, while Owen was pulled away by his uncles for photos, I found my mother near the gift table and asked her straight out, "Did you tell Grandma Dorothy not to come to my shower?" My mother's smile faltered for half a second before she caught it. "Where is this coming from? Just answer me, Mom." She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "I asked her to sit that one out." "Yes, but Margot, you don't know what she said at your cousin's engagement party? She stood up during the toasts and turned it into a speech about how nobody appreciates what she sacrificed in front of people who had nothing to do with any of it. I was trying to protect your day. That's all. She thinks you've been erasing her. She thinks this family doesn't have room for her anymore." My mother's eyes filled fast, the way they used to when I was a kid and she was too tired to hide it. I have spent 30 years being told I'm not doing enough for that woman. I paid her health insurance for 4 years after Dad left before she'd admit she needed help. I drove her to every appointment. And the one time I asked for a single afternoon that was just about you, without a scene, I became the villain. I hadn't known about the insurance. I hadn't known about most of it. Both of them had been carrying pieces of a story neither one had told me. And I had spent the whole night assuming I understood the shape of something I'd only seen from one angle. "She rewrote my toast," I said quietly. "Last night, she wanted to say something about herself, in her own words, without you shaping how people hear it." My mother went still. "What does it say?" "It says she feels invisible next to you. It says some people forget where they came from." I watched her face carefully. "It's not kind to you, Mom, but I don't think it's a lie either. I think it's just hurt, dressed up as an insult." For a long moment, my mother didn't say anything. She looked past me, toward the head table, toward the empty seat beside my grandfather's old chair, the one my grandmother had quietly asked the coordinator to move that morning, closer to the doors, farther from the family. "Bring her back to the table," my mother finally said. "And Margot, whatever she wants to say up there, let her say it. I think it's time I actually listened instead of just managing her." I didn't know yet what my grandmother would choose to say when she had the microphone in her hand and 200 people waiting to hear whichever version of the truth she finally decided was hers to tell. I found my grandmother by the doors, exactly where she'd asked to be moved, sitting with her purse in her lap like she was ready to leave the moment the cake was cut. I crouched down beside her chair, still in my dress, and told her what my mother had said, that she could speak, that she should. Grandma Dorothy looked at me for a long moment, like she was checking whether I meant it or was just saying what a bride says to keep the peace on her own wedding day. "I mean it," I said. "But not those pages, Grandma. Not the version aimed at her. Say what you actually want her to know, not what you want her to feel bad about." She was quiet for a second, then nodded once. Slow, the way she used to when I was small. And she was deciding I'd finally said something worth agreeing with. The coordinator handed her the microphone 20 minutes later. My mother stood near the front, arms crossed loosely, watching with an expression I hadn't seen on her in years, something closer to bracing than managing. My grandmother rose from her seat, smoothed her dress, and walked to the front of the tent slower than I'd ever seen her walk anywhere. "I wrote something else last night," she started, and I watched my mother's shoulders tighten. "I'm not going to read it. I tore it up this morning, and I think that was the right choice, even if it took my granddaughter to talk me into it." A soft laugh moved through the tent. My mother's arms uncrossed slightly. "What I want to say instead is simpler," my grandmother went on. "Margot, your mother raised you on very little, and she did it while I wasn't always the mother to her that I should have been. I've spent years feeling forgotten, and instead of saying that plainly, I let it come out sideways, as bitterness, as scenes at other people's parties. That's on me, not her." She looked toward my mother now, and her voice caught, just slightly. "I'm sorry, I should have said this a long time ago. Somewhere that wasn't your daughter's wedding." My mother's eyes were wet before she'd even crossed the space between them. She didn't say anything, just wrapped her arms around my grandmother right there in front of everyone, and I heard her whisper, "We're going to fix this. Actually fix it, not just survive it." My grandmother turned back to the microphone, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and smiled the way I remembered from when I was a kid. "Now, the toast I actually came here to give. To Margot and Owen. May your marriage be built on saying things early, plainly, and to each other's faces, so you never spend a wedding night rewriting what should have just been said out loud." The whole tent laughed and raised their glasses, and I found Owen's hand under the table, squeezing it as my mother and grandmother sat down beside each other for the first time in longer than I could remember. I didn't get the wedding toast I wrote 3 months ago. I got something better, a family that finally stopped rewriting each other and started, for once, telling the truth.